Before I start the homily, just one little notice. I'm going to be coughing off and on. It's not of cold, it's not allergy. Well, it is allergies, probably. Either allergies or some of the medicines I'm taking. So you don't have to worry about catching anything. Jesus says he's the Good Shepherd. What's going on? In this passage, Jesus and his disciples are visiting Jerusalem. In the Gospel of John, they go down there quite a bit. And it's the feast of the dedication of the temple. Now, dedication of the temple, we know that with a different term. Did you ever hear of Hanukkah? That's what they're celebrating. And one of the readings for Hanukkah is a passage from Ezekiel that talks about God being the Good Shepherd. You see, God had placed kings and priests in charge of the people of Israel. And the kings, because they were descended from David, who was a shepherd, they were called the Good Shepherds. But they weren't. They only thought of their own needs, their own wants. So finally, almost disgustingly, God says, I've had enough with them. I'm going to be the shepherd. I will lead the people. Now notice, it's not quite God saying that in this passage. It's Jesus. In the Gospels, Jesus does not tend to say he's God. But other things he says makes it clear. If God's the shepherd in the Old Testament and Jesus is the shepherd in the New, guess what? And what does that shepherd do for us? First of all, he guides us. We don't know the way to go. And believe me, sheep are not the smartest animal in the farmyard. They will get lost. They will do silly things. In fact, they usually have a lead sheep leading the flock. And if it goes into dangerous territory, the shepherd will use a little rod and staff to teach it its way. But if it doesn't learn, there's one last chance to save the life of that sheep. He breaks its leg and then carries it until the leg is healed. Do you ever feel that way sometimes? That God sort of said, no, not that way, and didn't make it work because we had to learn a lesson. Well, this shepherd will lead us in the right way, ways that sometimes we wouldn't choose on our own. For example, when we watch the evening news, isn't it confusing, frustrating? This shepherd reminds us to pray for those people because there's enough hate going around the world. We've got to heal it with our love. This shepherd reminds us that when somebody cuts us off in traffic, we've got to say a prayer for that person. You're going to mention God's name anyways, might as well make it a prayer. This shepherd reminds us that even if no one's looking, actions of love and service still count. And so this shepherd is guiding us on the right way. This shepherd is also protecting us. Did you notice how it said that Jesus is ready to lay down his life? Now, this one always bothered me. Why would God the Father want Jesus to die? It's almost as if God's in heaven saying, I won't forget the theology that talks about the Eucharist, and let's face it, it's a mystery beyond our understanding. But when you leave this chapel after receiving the Eucharist, don't you sense that something's different? Don't you sense that it's okay? And then he nourishes us with our daily food, that he's the one who makes sure that we have enough to eat, enough to share. But then he nourishes us to feed the deepest hunger of our hearts, that we're loved. His is the only love in our life that will never make a mistake and never go away. That is the deepest hunger we have. Again, he loves us to death. And in protecting us, sometimes he's protecting us from stuff outside of ourselves, the temptations. For example, driving down Folly Quarter Road, and the person in front of you has the nerve to do 35 miles an hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. He teaches us how to calm down and not be suckered into some of these temptations. I have a favorite prayer when I find myself losing control. It's the old Jesus prayer from the Eastern tradition. Lord Jesus, Son of the living God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And by the third time I say it, I find myself calm again. Sometimes the greatest danger he protects us from is ourselves. Because again, we're like sheep. Sheep are so dumb, they will graze on a hillside that's too steep, and they tend to roll over on their back. And once on their back, they're like turtles. They can't get up again. So if you don't have the shepherd to push them up again, the gases in their intestines expand and they explode. Now, I'm not talking Monty Python sheep. They just die. And so you need that shepherd there to push them upright again. Sort of reminds us of us grazing on a hillside a little too steep, doesn't it? And how often we take risks with our spiritual life. Now this shepherd, he even knows us by name. Remember at the resurrection, Mary Magdalene's there and looking and doesn't recognize Jesus? And he finally says, Mary, and she knows who it is. Jesus calls us by name. It's not a generic thing where Jesus saved all humanity. Jesus saved Mary and John and Willie because he loves us that much. And even if you had sinned 1,000,000 times worse than you have sinned, he would have still died for you. That's how much he loves you. Now, Jesus is our good shepherd. But when he went up to heaven, he didn't leave us alone. Remember what he said to Peter? Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord. Feed my sheep. And he asked him 3 times. Oh, I'm sorry. I lived in Italy for a long while. This is 3 in Italy. I got to do this. He asked him 3 times because Peter denied him 3 times. And Peter's being made into the shepherd. Now, when Peter's made into the chief shepherd, number 1, Peter has to remember he's not perfect. He sinned. He denied Jesus. And still Jesus chose him. And number 2, he's got to remember that it's not about power. It's about service. The one who wants to be the greatest has to serve others. The first thought of our day, what good things can I do for others? And it wasn't just Peter who was made into the shepherd. Every one of us is called to be a shepherd. He might be the authority we have in our family, at work, in a group. Or it might be that we're not in charge of anything. But by our good example, we can draw people to Christ. Some of our holiest brothers in the community have been the ones who never were named into an important job. But just their quiet dignity, their love, gave us a tremendous lesson. And now some of you in chapel this morning, you're of a certain age. And if you want to know what a certain age is, you're there. There's another form of shepherding that we can do. We can let others help us. Wouldn't you rather volunteer than ask someone for help? But there comes a time in our life when we have to surrender and realize we can't do it alone. We have to be vulnerable. And isn't that what we have to do sometimes in our society? A society that rejects vulnerability, that wants to be in charge, that wants power and riches. And by our simple surrender to where we are, we give the message that it's okay, that he loves me no matter what. I don't have to earn it. I don't have to prove it. I can rest in his arms because the Lord is our shepherd and nothing shall we want.